Thank you for inviting. Welcome. See, what I do in short is I belong to an organization called CELCO, which promotes sustainable energy to poor households in South India, in the state of Karnataka. The whole philosophy that we started many years ago was to destroy three myths. The three myths being the poor can't afford technology, poor can't maintain technology, and the third myth was you can't run a commercial company while trying to meet social objectives. So this was started as an experiment way back in 1994. I don't know how many of you were born, and especially, so I'm actually older than it is, and it's sometimes in the office I'm told I'm too old to be in the organization. Anyhow, I've stuck along. The whole concept was for us when we started way back in 1994. The philosophy was that you look at today. Today, 1.6 billion people don't have electricity. You have 2 billion people using undesired fuels to actually cook at home. And just to give an example, if in an open 3-stone cooker, if people are cooking inside the house, that's equivalent to, if a woman is cooking for 2, lunch and dinner, it's equivalent to 2 cigarette packets a day. And 1 million women and children in the world die because of this indoor air pollution. That never comes in the newspapers. We have sent man to the moon. We have created iPads. We have created phones, smartphones, but we have not created a smart cooker. And that's for us is how are we actually bringing the problems of the poor onto the forefront. See, every time what happens today is that we assume that a lot of the technologies that are being built for the rich, whether it's rich in India, rich in UAE, or rich in Washington, then how do we then tailor-make it to fit the poor, rather than looking at the problems of the poor from day one with a clean slate and then move forward? And that was a concept. And before that, just to give a background, I did my bachelor's in energy engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, and then went to the US to do my master's and PhD, and then realized that everything I did was really of no use to the poor. And so I had to spend time in the rural areas to unlearn what I had learned in my PhD and master's. So it's something that what you learn, we have specifics of bachelor's degrees and then master's and PhD. It was 2 years of pure unlearning, because when we study, and especially when you come from an educational system in South Asia, you're so fixed. You're okay, this is what you study, this is how you get your grades, and that's very real connection to the and the 2 years of living without electricity way back in 92, 93 in Sri Lanka and India actually taught me that why do I have a degree? Not to dishearten you, but you are in such a great position today to use your degree to the actual uselessness and not waste the time that I had to do for 2 to 3 years unlearning that. You have much more opportunities. See, the concept that we took is solar. The moment people think about solar, oh, it's an expensive technology. That's the first thing that comes into, right? But simple, I'll tell you a simple example of a street vendor. Okay, a street vendor on a daily basis, and in a typical city like in India, spends 15 rupees a day on kerosene for her 4 hours of vending in the evening, 6 to 10 o'clock. That's 450 rupees a month. That's approximately $10 a month for 4 hours of lighting. That you and me don't spend $10 for one light. Forget kerosene. Now, solar light, actually, per day she's spending 15 rupees. A solar light works out to at 10 rupees a day. Now tell me, is solar expensive? The problem is, what she says is 300 rupees a month is expensive. This is the best financial lesson I have learned from a street vendor, is 300 rupees a month is expensive, but 10 rupees a day is fine. The question is, how do you combine financial innovation or finance with technology? If today you create a 5-year financing for that poor lady to buy solar, and somebody is able to collect 10 rupees a day on a daily basis, she can afford a so-called expensive technology like solar, but it's cheaper than what she was spending, that is 15 rupees. Now she's only spending 10 rupees. Now tell me, is solar expensive? When we look at any technology, whether it's solar, whether it's pico-hydro, whether it's biogas, anything, we have to look at it holistically, just not look at just a technology side or a finance side. Or the same way, what happened was, in this case, Now she has finance. She says, I need to pay 10 rupees a day. The bank would say, the street vendor has no credit worthiness. I cannot finance the street vendor, and I do not have the transaction cost to collect 10 rupees on a daily basis. What we did was we created an entrepreneur. We put up solar panels on top of his roof, and then he would charge 30 to 40 batteries on a daily basis and deliver at 6 o'clock to the lady. What the lady needs is 4 hours of good lighting. That's what she asked for. I don't care whether it comes from solar. I don't care whether it comes from diesel. I need 4 hours of lighting. So he charges 10 rupees for her. And so he delivers these 30 street vendors with lights. And he comes back at 10 o'clock, takes the 10 rupees, and takes the batteries back home. So you have created an enterprise that he is charging 10 rupees. For him, per battery works out to be 6 rupees. So he's making money per battery per day is 4 rupees. So 4 into 30 is 120 rupees for 2 hours of work on a daily basis. So have I spoken about subsidies? No. As we say in Selco, subsidies is always for the rich. The poor want financing. And always we say solar is expensive for the rich and affordable for the poor. As you go deeper into the economic strata of any society, the cost that poor pay for energy is higher than the rich. The poor people in Manhattan, in Chicago, actually spend 30% more on energy than in Manhattan, anywhere in the world, as you go poor. So it so much makes sense to create sustainable energy as a priority for many of the poor to jump over from a degraded grid onto sustainable. And that's the best combination of sustainable energy and alleviating poverty without talking of climate change. I'll tell you another example. How do we serve in a financial, social, and environmentally sustainable manner to people who earn $16 a month? There are families who earn $16 a month. Now, providing solar to people who earn $16 a month is unthinkable. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, it's very expensive. How can people? Now, what we did was, these kids go to school. Now, when kids go to school, they go typically 6 to 7 years. They pay a nominal amount of fees, 10 months a year. So suppose they go for 8 years. So 8 multiplied by 10 is 80 months. Now think 80 months as finance. What we did was, we put solar panel on top of the roof, school. It was built into the educational infrastructure, and the light and battery at home. The battery was less than the weight of a lunchbox. So the kid comes to the school with the lunchbox, so-called battery, plugs it into the school's charging station, and as soon as the school is over, she goes back home. And if she doesn't come to school, there's no light at home. What the mother says is, I don't care whether you study or not, you go to school because I need light. Now think of this way. They only get financed for 5 years, the battery and the light, which comes to 1 rupee a day, which the parents are able to afford, and the cost of the solar panels is built into the school. Have I talked about subsidies? No. You do not need to create subsidies, as long as you rethink the business model. Now, each one of you, for example, there's a power plant, like a coal or a nuclear power plant, which has transmission lines, and then you get light at home, right? You pay for the utility. You don't pay for the coal-fired plants on day one. Now the coal plant is A, the transmission line is B, and what you pay is C. It's the same thing. A is the school, yeah. B is the what you call it as a kid, who's the transmission line, and C is the house. So now you have a mathematical equation, A plus B plus C. A plus B could be an entrepreneur delivering lights. It could be a plantation owner. A plus B could be a cooperative that is run by the women who actually provide electricity. Now you can actually play around with the equations in such a way that if you get soft money, which needs to be subsidized, rather than just looking at capital as a subsidy, right? So these are models that when you see what happens in our engineering schools in our part of the world is we always think very in silos. We all need to get away from our backgrounds, whether being an economist, whether being an engineer, whether being a medical, we need to be social scientists to actually look at it. And another example, right? There was an auto rickshaw driver who came actually and said, I want a 3-light system. So a technician who saw the auto rickshaw driver and said, this fellow cannot afford a 3-light system. He said, wait, it's not the question of 3-light. Let me come to your house. He went to the auto rickshaw driver's house and saw the roof, and then he went to the top of the roof, broke a part of it and put 1 light. And the technician he did not need 3 lights. He just needed light in 3 rooms. The perspective about, you put one light in the middle and all the 3 rooms were lit. If we had designed for a 3 light, the auto rickshaw driver would have always said the solar is expensive, he would have gone out. Now, the cost has come down by 1/3 by just re-looking at the design of technology, putting 1 light and all 3 lights. And after 6 months, 20, 30 other households near actually bought solar system. That is, how do you re-look? It's not technology. Again, 30, 40 houses bought because this house, and all those 40 houses, according to the World Bank, are below poverty line. And none of them actually asked for subsidies. All asked for financing. So what we did, a lot of our work, 80% to 90% of work, actually is working with financial institutions to come up with different financial products. Like, for example, I gave the example of street vendors, right? Now when you create a technology and you have to think of what the cash flow is. As I said about a street vendor, if you ask her 20 rupees tomorrow, she'll not be able to pay 20 rupees. She'll pay 10 rupees. How do you create financing in a way somebody collects on a daily basis? Now I look at the other end, a paddy farmer. A paddy farmer needs 5-year financing. He will only give the money on January because his cash flow cycle is once a year. A peanut farmer, twice a year. A sugarcane farmer, twice a year. A school teacher, monthly. So it's a question about how do you mix technology and finance together. Now I make it a little more complicated. In a sense, how do you then also, as you go poorer, you also have to link up energy or energy services with income generation. For example, suppose you have a sewing machine, a solar-powered sewing machine. It's excitement to write about how a solar-powered sewing machine can enhance the income of a poor lady. Instead of doing 4 shirts a day, somebody is able to do 8 shirts a day. But the challenge is not about from 4 shirts to 8 shirts. The question that we all need to ask, does she have the market to sell the 8 shirts? If she does not have the market to sell 8 shirts, the technology is a debt. And that's the beauty of sustainable energy, is that it makes you think on efficiency, market linkages, and you provide solution holistically at the doorstep for the poor day one. That is what the grid will never be able to do. Grid only supplies electricity, does not force the thinking of market linkages. Other example, Siddhis. I was talking to Siddhis yesterday. Siddhis are African slaves from Tanzania and Mozambique brought by the Portuguese settlers a century and a half ago into India. When they landed into the ports of Goa, many of these Siddhis, or that time they were not called the Siddhis, but many of the slaves ran off into the jungles of Karnataka a century and a half ago. And our society being as racist as anybody else, many of the Siddhis could not get integrated into the society for primarily that the skin was too dark. And that's how, if you go now to the Siddhis, the houses are time frozen as time frozen. They speak Kannada, they speak the local language, they dance according to the old traditions in Tanzania and Mozambique, but they were never been able to integrate. So we picked, and they earn around $30 a month. So we asked the Siddhi community, can you come to the bank? They said, no, the bank has glass doors. I cannot enter anything that has glass doors. And the bank would say, Siddhis, I cannot finance. They have nothing in the house. They have 2 pots and 2 pans. What do you expect? And all these Siddhis, they were spending per month, on an average, 140 rupees. That's approximately $2.8 a month on kerosene and candles. And because they were laborers in other people's farm, they were spending approximately $1 a month on phone charging, mobile charging. So $2.50 plus 1, it's around $3.50 a month. Take it as $4. $4 out of their $30 of income. So now take it as $4 multiplied by 12. That's $48. Take it as $50 a year. 50 multiplied by 5 years is $250, right? The poor are paying $250 in 5 years. A solar system with interest, bank interest, costs $180 that can give you 2 lights and a mobile charge. Now tell me, is solar expensive? The barrier is not technology. Barrier is how do you create appropriate financing for the Siddhis? So what they were spending on kerosene, candles and mobile is now being transferred to the bank. And what it becomes in the end is an asset. What we need to look at is how do we create assets for the poor rather than making the poor as consumers. So we went to the bank and the bank said, boss, I said, yes, all negatives. Tell me what will force you to finance to these 32 families. They said, Harish, 30, to my colleagues, Biswal, they said 100% guarantee. I said, fine. We put up 100% guarantee. After 6 months, we went and asked the bank, are you happy with the collections? They said, we're very happy with the collections. And we asked, if you knew this information 6 months ago, how much would you have asked us for guarantee? They said 20%. We immediately removed our 80% money and gave it to somebody else. So the question is, are 20% money leveraged 5 times local capital? When we asked the Siddhis, are you happy with the solar light? We never expected this answer. They said, we're more than happy with the solar light, but more than that, I have a bank. As soon as I finish the solar loan, I will take a loan for a sewing machine. What she was telling, that I have become bankable. Had they had the grid, they wouldn't have never had the bank account. And they would never have created the credit history or credit with the bank. Now, a simple solar system actually made them much more socially acceptable that they were actually looking at livelihoods. That's the deep connection that sustainability has with other social objectives like providing bank loans to the poor to buy other income generating. That's a complete different, if you go to the Siddhis now, it's a complete different social transformation just because of one loan that they take 6 months ago. Same way, when we do, what the beauty of sustainable energy, it forces you to think. When a school came and said, we want 10 computers and we want you to power it by solar, we said, well, do you need 10 computers or do you need 10 terminals? Because in a school, you don't need 10 computers because the working loads are not very high. Because of solar, we knew that if we design it for 10 computers, it will actually become more expensive for the school. What we were thinking is efficiency. Because if you're talking of 1 computer and 10 terminals, I have reduced the requirement of solar by 80%. And then it becomes more affordable for the school. The second question we always ask is, why do you need the computers? They said, oh, the kids will learn. I said, yes, kids will learn. But what is the content in the computers that the kids will learn? If people don't have a right answer, we actually don't provide solar to them. Because it's unnecessarily going to be a technology debt. Because everybody will clap, it's a solar-powered computer. After 2-3 months of games, the computers will just have cobwebs on it, and people will not be working on it. So we force the schools to spend first money on efficiency, content, and then look at solar. And that somehow has built a branding for us over the years about how do you look at sustainably a company that need not be just a supplier. And when you start company, you need not be just a salesperson, or you do not just force a product down to the poor. Just look at what is the value. What is the value is that technology that is delivering at the doorstep for the poor, and the poor will pay for it. And that's been our 18 years of experience. We've installed 150,000 systems in individual households, and through the bank finance. We've done around 3,000 to 4,000 institutions like churches, mosques, temples, orphanages, which have been, for example, icon. Like for example, when we put up a solar in a church, the father said that during the mass, every time what happens, the power goes off, and I want a light that will light up Jesus Christ while I'm praying. So after the Sunday mass, a lot of the people came and said, when the power went off, how was Jesus Christ blessed? They said, by solar. And we had 20 clients that week. And that's the power of religion, the power of that's why we look at not only what are the power of innovation at the grassroots level, who are the pioneers who will actually push. And traditionally what we've also done, the power of we don't do any marketing. As an organization, we have a philosophy, there's no outward marketing. What we do is until the people don't realize that it's actually value, we don't push technology down. What we typically do is, in typical households where a woman has been using the light for 6 months, we invite 30, 40 other women around. It's just like the Tupperware marketing methodology. The women sit, and the woman who's been using it for 6 months, she basically says that how it has been she has been using the technology for 6 months. And then we have a banker in the midst who then say this is how it's financed. And that's how 90% of the intervention that we have done is only out of mouth. And then we've also worked with bankers and saying that how do you look at sustainable technology as a product portfolio? And I was telling again yesterday is that we need to push and we need to push the thinking of solar not as a solar technology, but something that is intrinsic value to the household. And that's how, for example, a chairman of a bank, and what she did was, she went one step further. She said, Harish, yes, I mean, this is all fine. Solar is fine. Why not we look at rethink? Because a lot of the women in our portfolio have problems of going. There are no toilets. There are no latrines. They have to go out under the darkness. Why don't we create a loan of an integrated loan, solar, kitchen, and toilet? She called it the Sampurna. Sampurna means complete. A complete loan. A complete loan is you take this loan, you will get a good kitchen, you will get a good toilet, and you will get a solar light built into this. And it's not an extra burden. That actually took off. That took off. So it's a holistic thinking that by a banker which led. It is not about solar technology getting financed, but what is the value for the end user. And I think this is the things when you look at renewable technology, when you do a master's or PhD in technology, you need to look at the social side of it. You need to look at the market linkage side of it. It's every time people say, let's reduce the cost of technology. Sometimes by reducing the cost of the technology, you also might take out values which would have been more important. It's not the cheapness of a technology that is important. It's a value that the technology provides. As we say, an expensive technology with an affordable finance actually makes it proper, financially and socially sustainably and delivered at the doorstep of the end users. So day laborers, street vendors, housewives, Siddhi communities, school children, all have been part of this. For example, for us, how do you put it in Excel sheet in terms of people say, how do you define economics? I'll give an example. 2 years ago, a father called me and said, do you remember that you had put solar in 97 in our house and my daughter was 8 years old? And I said, yes. And he said, now I have got her engaged. I said, congratulations. But I have a problem. She doesn't want to get married because the husband's house has no electricity. Now, can you talk to her and convince her? I said, how can I convince her? What would I convince her? Okay, he handed over the phone to her, and she called me, Harish, brother, do you expect my kids to lead the same sort of life that I did for the first 8 years of my life? Now you convince my father why I should not get married. So I'm stuck between the father and the daughter. The father hands the phone. His father said, Harish, I understand. I'm paying you the money. Go and install in the husband's house. Don't say I paid the money, saying that it's a wedding gift from you. And now my daughter's life is in your hand, and he hangs up the phone. After we put up solar, she actually got married. But how do you put that in an Excel sheet? We all talk about Excel sheets, per kilowatt hour, etc. How do you put that in an Excel sheet? Same an example of a maid servant. A maid servant said, as we just asked her, why did you buy solar? She said, see, I don't want my kids to be another maid servant. And I needed them to be a better life, so I wanted them to be educated. But the issue was, at 8 o'clock in the evening, my daughter, while doing homework, she drools, she falls sleepy, and I'm afraid that she might fall on the kerosene light. And I have to get up early in the morning to do maid servant work in somebody else's house. So I always wake up not fresh. And I'm always afraid. So I have to stay awake till she finishes her homework. So I bought solar for two things. One is, I can sleep peacefully. I'm not worried about her drooling over. And second, she can do her homework. Now, a maid servant bought solar. Now the question is, can you put the reasons that she bought it for, can you put it in an Excel sheet? Same way, we have clients. One day we were asking these clients, what do you do? And she said, I'm a beggar. And I said, and because we had to note down for a bank loan, she said, I'm a beggar. And I don't want my kids to be another beggar. So if a beggar can buy solar, we all should be ashamed. Keep talking about technology to be expensive. Because today, in the world, if you map out the social unsustainability and unrest in the world, which is more in our part of the region, whether you talk from Palestine to Afghanistan to parts of India to everywhere, it's so much mapped to lack of energy sources, to lack of opportunities. And why there are frustrations? Because we, the well-educated, are not creating enough opportunities for the poor kids. We are all here because our parents were in the right place. The poor are poor because their parents were not in the right place. So it's not the question we are smart or not. They are equally smart. Many of them are much smarter than me, multiple times, just that their parents were not in the right place. So it's our duty as society, as humanity, when we have got all the good education, especially you coming from us, that you have an obligation towards the 4 billion people, because that's where, for me, social unsustainability is much more expensive than the future financial sustainability that we are all so enamored by talking about IRRs and etc. It's not. If you map the energy poverty in the world, it equally maps the violence that is going on in the world. And it's a poverty. It's a poverty that is something that we need to eradicate. And what else but sustainable energy is actually giving us a wonderful platform to remove poverty without talking of climate change. So we are actually balancing environmental solutions by saying that if all the developing countries today are telling that, no, we need to look at coal and nuclear, that's why the poor will actually come benefit. It's not true. It's not true. All will go into inefficiency of the grid as well as of the large industries. The poor will still be left behind. I think, and that encompasses what we're trying to do for 18 years to prove that the poor can actually pay. And it's up to us. How do we actually take it forward? And so it's in a way, as we keep saying that we started in 1994, and we have a joke in the organization. We started the same year as Lehman Brothers. And we are still here. And I tell people who have invested in Lehman Brothers that if you had invested in us, you would have at least seen the money still there. So the question is, and look at everybody talks of scale up. I don't know how many of you have looked at the newspapers in the last one when the Citibank laid off 11,000 people. Classic statement I read. To be sustainable, we have to scale down. To be sustainable, we have to close 8 offices. It's exactly the opposite pressure that we all get. You need to scale up and scale up and scale up. Then why is the Citibank telling us that the only way to be sustainable is to lay off people, to downgrade 8 offices, and to scale down? And the question is, that's when we said, in 18 years, while providing social service to the poor, we have never laid off a single person. We've never had to sacrifice on any salary for 18% for the 18 years. It's highly possible. And when you are getting this wonderful opportunity through the whole Masdar Institute, I think you just need to take advantage, because today the business models the future business models are not going to be on Starbucks and Walmart. It's going to be on the 4 billion people in Latin America, in Africa, and in Asia. And you based out of education, based out of Abu Dhabi and UAE, are at the center point. Geographically, you are in the best position to basically look at solutions in Asia and solutions in Africa. We do not have, it's the best position to look at what works here, what does not work here, creating, and this institute is at the height of creating that sense of innovation, that what is working in these 2 continents, because these 2 continents are going to define what the future sustainability in the world is. And today you look at that as a virgin territory of innovation. And innovation just don't look at financial innovation, but look at technology innovation. Because many of these problems, when you sit down, no amount of Google search can help you solve those problems. And that is the excitement. Because don't look, as I said, I don't believe many of the MBA schools around the world actually teach you that innovation or how to run a business that is apt for that 4 billion people. So I've always had a disagreement with C.K. Prahlad, who wrote the book Bottom of the Pyramid, because that book actually looked at poor as a market. You and me don't need to be looked as markets. Why should the poor be looked as markets? And today poor need how do you redefine innovation? And Selco in a very small way has defined that they will buy sustainable technology provided you are able to think think very holistically. And in a sum, 150,000. Our next plan is for 4 years is to look at 200,000 additional clients in the state of Karnataka, and look at cook stores as another option, because we feel very guilty that when we go to somebody's house, a brilliant light, but a pathetic way of cooking. If the walls are completely dark, can you imagine the lungs of the lady? And that is what 2 billion people in the world are actually going through. So we should all be ashamed about. And I'll finally end by saying that 4 or 5 years ago, I went to Gujarat, and there was a schoolgirl who was coming back home, and I said, "Oh, you're coming back from school?" She said, "No, I'm coming back from collecting wood." And she went at 8 o'clock and came back at 12 o'clock. And the mother said, "Oh, I used to go at 8 o'clock and come back at 10 o'clock. I said, "Is your mother alive?" The grandmother, "Oh, yeah." And the grandmother said, "I used to go at 8 o'clock and come back at 9 o'clock. So in 3 generations, the forest has actually gone 3 times. And instead of going to school 6 days, she goes to collecting wood for 5 days. The kid might have an so-called Indian passport, but she's a kid for this world. There are 2 million women, girls between 5 and 15 go and collect wood rather than going to school. So you and me are equally responsible if after 20 years we have 2 million unread mothers. We are equally responsible for that collective failure, that they had no other choice but to collect wood rather than going to school. Another story I ended with that, in parts of India, the collection of flowers ends does between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning. And these small kids have long hairs, not because it's a fashion, because that helps them balance a kerosene lamp. They go out balancing the kerosene lamp at 2 o'clock in the morning to collect flowers. They pick flowers because they're shorter, they can actually pick flowers from below. Between 2 and 3, they pick up, these are 6, 7, 8-year-old girls, pick flowers. And then 3 or 4 o'clock, their mother would sit in a bus and sell it in a town at 5 o'clock. The question is, when we said, boss, this is ridiculous. I mean, how do you look at this innovation very differently? How do you actually provide better lights? The same case was in the midwife. A midwife, when she delivers a baby in one part of India during the daytime, she will actually cut a hole in the wall, put a mirror outside, and reflect the light inside while delivery. In the night time, can you imagine there's a kerosene light, and there are only 2 women because no man is allowed during the delivery. And as soon as the delivery is done, just imagine one lady who's writhing in pain after the delivery, and she has the baby in her hands. The kerosene light or a solar light is somewhere there. The hot water. Can you imagine the plight in that situation? And people say not kerosene light, but a solar light is also not going to find a solution for it. So what we did was we basically experimented and looked at a miner's cap. A miner's cap which has a solar light with a battery, and she can actually move her head here and there. So that becomes very flexible for her. But you can only come with solution when you sit with the midwives and know through the whole process. The same thing actually can be done by the women who collect flowers. Because the midwife came and said, I only do 3 deliveries a month, I cannot pay for the solar light. So we created a woman entrepreneur who bought 10 or 20 of them and rented it out to the flower pluckers and the midwives. So created a whole business chain around it. You created an enterprise, you created a value for the midwife, you created a value for the flower pluckers without talking about subsidies. That is what we talk about as a holistic solution. With this, I would please, I don't want you to be just quiet, just ask questions rather than me just talking about it. And I just gave this was a summary of thought process that we need to look at sustainability much deeper than just technology. There's so much opportunities for all of us, because if 1.6 billion people don't have electricity after 10 years, we as a generation, we as educated class in the world have failed to do our duty. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity. Thank you. Yes, sir.
For the past 18 years, were you able to measure the economic and social benefit of your projects?
In some ways, sir, but I would still say, I personally am not satisfied with the measurement. But yes, if you look at business side of it, in terms of wherever we have put solar light to businesses, like small street vendors, or there's an average of 15% growth in their own livelihoods. In terms of the education, there are at least 60 to 70% more attendance, and in terms of education levels in many of the households that we've been able to do it. And many of the people who got married after, because if it's an 18-year history, there were a lot of girls and boys don't know that lighting can be done by anything but solar. They only think that solar is the only way to do electricity. Just like a lot of us only think that coal or oil is the only way to look at it. They only think of, and that has a bigger impact than any of it, because they, when they got married, or their kids, all look at solar in a different way. Yes, we have some sort of a measurements, but I think the measurements are still very, what you call it, as up to numerics, 15%, 18%. But deeper in terms of the bank accounts, that what else because of solar that they have been able to look at businesses, that's still those quantification is still not, I mean, we need to get more social scientists to look at those numbers, which are not really tangible. But that is the challenge we have, because that's the only way to define IRR in a different way.
If we want to expand this to middle income groups who have high power appliances in their homes, for them the solar is still expensive. So how do you tackle that?
No, we don't tackle that because we don't serve those clients. Yeah, but there is ways to do that, because in especially a country like India, or look at countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, there are two ways of looking at it. One is hybrid models, in a sense that the unreliability of electricity is, see, wherever electricity is extremely reliable for 24 hours, solar cannot compete at today's costs. But in many of the rural households, semi-urban households or urban households in India or Africa, the brownouts are very common. So you can actually design systems that are 20% grid, 30% grid, 40% grid, or 80% grid, and the rest to be solar. So a lot of households would, in places where the electricity goes out for 6 hours, they go at 50% solar and 50% grid. Where it goes to 8 to 10 hours, they would actually increase the solar part. There are people who would start with 30% solar and over a period of 5 years actually do it at 100% solar. So that is one. But secondly, what you hit upon is a much larger problem in a different manner. Like a woman came to us and said that I have a sewing machine. Can you power it with solar? Because of X number of hours of power cut, I lose. But the problem, I asked her, what do you do? We asked her what we do. Our colleagues asked. She said, I do a sari and a blouse. You know, for a sari and a blouse, you need 30 watts. The minimum available in the country is 110 watts. Now, I am designing solar for the inefficiency of the sewing machine. The blame goes on solar to be expensive. Nobody talks about the inefficiency of the sewing machine. I am designing solar for that 70 watts extra. Until the consumer good industry changes the concept of efficiency, we always say inefficiency is the best friend of grid. Only coal and nuclear can compete and provide inefficient materials, but so sewing machine, silk weaving machine, basket making machines are all, that's typical fan. You know, a typical fan in India, in the developing world, is around 80 watts. The most efficient fan today, according to the world standards in China, is 31 watts. Now, I am designing solar for unnecessarily for 50 watts, right? Until the consumer industry, production industry also changes and stricter rules of efficiency comes in, renewable energy is hard to compete with inefficiencies. And that's where what happens in the semi-urban. But there's a push, like the Bureau of Energy Efficiency in India is putting stricter regulations on efficiency. And that is where semi-urban areas and urban areas will have an edge.
Transforming the way cooking is done in households. Have you looked into the prospects of having solar cookers for people who don't have?
See, so there are two parts. One is, yes, solar. We've been looking at solar cookers a lot. A lot of people still have a tendency not to cook outside. Okay, and then we have the whole inconvenience of changing the angle, and many of the rural areas is I'm not sure the dog will come and eat it. Right, or somebody might steal my food if I don't look at it properly. Those are some of the issues, and the traditional box cookers don't go into frying, or you can make wheat. So the cooking is more complicated than a lot of there are two fuel sources, coal and wood. Then you have rice and wheat. Then you have 2 people, 4 people, 6 people in the house. You need to look at different cook stoves for different people. Electric cookers balances all this and makes the level playing field. But when you're talking of traditional, you need to look at many. And unfortunately, I tell you, is that if I look at India and I put all the cookers, designers in one room, 32 of them, all are men who have never cooked. And your client base, that's exactly what I keep telling in universities in India. You have to let your women engineers bloom. We need women engineers. We need who can think very differently from this. And everywhere, we need gender into technology. Thought process not only as an end user. Stupidly today we think whenever we talk about gender, a poor woman cooking. That's not gender. We need women policymakers, women bankers, we need women entrepreneurs, women technologists, and women end users. That is when the cooking will actually change. And everybody says, oh, I'll do. Now we'll experiment. Go to a rural household. How do you think? Should we change this? She's very attracted by the color sometimes. Yeah, it's good. But no, it's more than just that. And that's solar cookers. The large cookers are good for example, institutions like mosques, temples, and churches. When you have residential schools, you can have solar concentrators. But beyond that, today there are a lot of cultural issues, like people like the smell of wood in the dal, right? Or smell of wood in the roti, for example. So what are we looking at is how do we increase the efficiency rather than the kid going 5 days? Can 2 days worth collection of wood is enough so that it's a better burning process? And simple chimneys so that the smoke actually goes out. Let's start with that and then move upwards. Even that is, people are not spending time to actually design. Yes, there are, but I still think that people who are designing it are sitting in glassed, air-conditioned rooms and designing it rather than slogging it in the rural areas. And but cooking is a very complex that people need to spend time. So I keep joking, there are enough papers written on cooking that you don't have enough cook stoves to burn those papers. I think we need to change that equation. Hopefully, some of you would do that.
In all the examples that you mentioned, you always say, and without subsidies. So there is no role for the government?
There is, I agree. The role of, the thing is, I shouldn't underestimate that, Hugo, in the sense that at the end level, I only explain the end level. If, for example, the banker needs to be trained, we need enough so-called soft money to build capacities. And what I mean by capacities is, how would bankers finance solar until they don't know about solar? There has to be a huge program to train the bankers, what they are financing. There's a huge, for example, if I look at the early 70s, when India was starving, when there was huge starvation in India, what Mrs. Indira Gandhi did was force the banks, nationalize them, and created a rural banking network. Okay. What happened was the banks started that 40% of the portfolio should be for banking, for agricultural financing. And there were ITIs, not the Indian Institute of Technology, but Indian Technical Institutes that had a training on pump repair shop, cycle repair shop, motor. So the ecosystem to support the farmers. That led to self-sufficiency in food. Today we have enough food in one side, people are starving. That's a supply chain issue. But self-sufficiency is food is there. That's the reason but huge subsidies went into creation of the financial ecosystem and the human resource ecosystem. And that is where I think subsidies are required. How do we train all the bankers? How do we train? And then today working capital for entrepreneurs to get into business is at a very high rate. If local entrepreneurs want to go and take business, it's at 18% interest rate. Solar business cannot be done. So if the government, rather than using money for capital subsidies, parks this money as guarantee in banks and reduces the interest rate from 18 to 11 or 8 or 10%, you'll have a march takeover by entrepreneurs doing this business. So subsidies need to be targeted. Subsidies need to be for ecosystem and capacity building, but not use the subsidies for reducing the cost of technology. That is the most unsustainable form. And that's the role of the government, to create human resources, to encourage the banking system, to create the guarantees. And that's where the government should play its role. And again today, for example, governments, like any of the governments, have a rural development department, they have an education department, they have a health department, right? While thinking of strategies of all three, they should say, where does sustainable energy play a role from day one? Okay, if I'm looking at education, I'm going to provide computers in the rural schools. Can I get the most high efficient computers powered by solar? Thinking today. Today what they do? Oh, education, computers, and then the Ministry of Renewable Energy will design. So there's the connection is not there. Why can't each department have a subset Ministry of Sustainable Energy? So the health is today, like I have health. Why not we took out refrigeration day one? Solar refrigeration for medicines